All right. I think others can join us as they get themselves organised, but we'll get started. So welcome everybody. It's lovely to see you here. This is our first Exchange Insights on supporting local civil society organisations as agents of change. I'm Liz Jackson. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Human Security and Social Change at La Trobe University. And I'm also a director of the RDI network. So I'm going to be chairing today's session. Before we start, I just want to do an acknowledgement of country. So today I'm joining you from my home, which is in Sydney, on the northern beaches of Sydney, just near Manly. If anybody's ever been to Sydney, that's near where the Manly ferries come in. So I want to acknowledge the Gaya-Magal people, who are the traditional custodians of the lands and waters here, and also the Garigal people of the wider Northern Beaches area. I pay my deepest respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today, wherever you're connecting from. So the suburb where I live now is now called Balgowlah, and that itself is an Aboriginal word that means North Harbour. So we're right close to Sydney Harbour. But for tens of thousands of years, this place was actually known as Kaimai. So long before European people arrived, the Gaya-Magal people lived, fished, gathered and told stories and cared for this land and the waters. So I want to acknowledge the rich histories, languages and custodianship of Aboriginal people across Australia and their deep and unbroken connection to country. I also recognise the devastating effects that colonisation had on Aboriginal people, and the fact that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So I just want to give a quick plug for the RDI network before we get into things. For those of you who don't know us, we're a community of researchers, evaluators, practitioners, NGOs, government consultants and students who are interested in quality ethical research and evidence that drives positive change in Asia and the Pacific and beyond. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about us, please have a look at our website. It's rdinetwork.org.au. And you can also follow us on LinkedIn. We're very easy to find. There are lots of resources on our website and also on our YouTube channel, including almost all the sessions from the RDI Exchange that was held in July this year. So no need for FOMO. If you weren't able to be there at the RDI Exchange, just about all of the sessions are there, so you can listen to them and all the insights that were shared. We are currently transitioning to paid membership, but in the interim, you can join up via the website. There's a little thing called join here, again, very easy to find, and then we can keep you updated on what's happening. So some of you will be aware, and I know some of you were there at our earlier biannual conference, the RDI Exchange, which we held in collaboration with the Institute for Sustainable Futures at the University of Technology. So we had so many great conversations there and got some really lovely feedback about how much people enjoyed those conversations. So we wanted to kind of be able to continue those discussions. So our new online event series called Exchange Insights is a way to do that. So to bring people back together, researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and do a bit of a deeper dive into some of the key issues that are shaping the development sector. So today's topic focuses on something that's really critical in international development. What is the role of local civil society organisations as agents of change? So, we know that local organisations are often the ones that are closest to the challenges in their communities and closest to the solutions. They've got that really deep local knowledge, they've got the trusted relationships and they've got the long-term commitment. They're there for the long haul. But, we know there are a whole host of barriers around funding, around influence, around visibility that can really limit their ability to be leading the change that they're working towards. So this session is really about exploring how development actors, donors, INGOs, and governments can kind of move beyond this tokenism and really support locally led, locally owned change. So we're going to be talking about things like, how can we shift power and resources so that local civil society can lead? What does meaningful partnership actually look like in practice? And how can we kind of create these enabling environments that really can sustain local voices, even when there are kind of shrinking space for civic actors. So our goal today is really to kind of move beyond principles and get to the nitty-gritty of practice, to think about what are the insights and the lessons that can really show us what equitable collaboration looks like in the real world. So over the next 90 minutes, here's how things are going to go. We'll start with a bit of a discussion with Sandra and Siale. I'm going to, pose to them a couple of questions to help kind of set the scene. And then we're going to open up and invite your questions and reflections, and I know you all have lots of them. And you can either raise your hand and ask a question, or you can post something in the chat as well. And then we're going to close with a final thought from each of our panelists, and a little bit of a wrap up before we finish at 1:30, which in our time. So I'm really, really excited to be joined today by two outstanding leaders who really bring deep and diverse experience from across the region. First is Dr. Sandra Hamid, who we just realised we've known each other for 20 years, which makes me feel a little bit old. But we first worked together at the Asia Foundation 20 years ago. So Sandra is now the Executive Director of AMINEF, the American Indonesian Exchange Foundation, which is the Fulbright Commission in Indonesia. She is a cultural anthropologist and a development specialist who is passionate about things like political participation, social inclusion, religious freedom, and pluralism. So she spent 18 years with the Asia Foundation, including 11 years as its country representative in Indonesia. So she really gets how civil society operates and adapts in complex political environments. And I'm also really excited to have Siale Ilolahia, the Executive Director of the Pacific Islands Association of Non-Governmental Organizations, or PIANGO. So Siale is a long-time civil society leader who's worked for many years to strengthen Pacific networks and amplify local voices across 24 countries and territories. And through PIANGO, she's been instrumental in driving regional collaboration on issues like climate change, gender equality, and Indigenous rights, and always with a really strong focus on self-determination and local leadership. So welcome, huge welcome to both of you, and thank you for joining us. And to all of you, welcome from wherever you're joining us from around the world. We're really looking forward to kind of an open and practical conversation today. So please do use the chat to share your thoughts or examples from your own experiences. And there's not that many of us, so we can also have plenty of space for chat verbally as well. All right, let's get started. I'm going to ask a question to both Sandra and Siale, and it's a broad kind of question just to kind of get us started about thinking about what is the role of civil society organisations. And both of you come to this with very different experiences and insights. So in the context that you work in, what do you see as the roles that civil society organisations currently play? And what could or should they be playing in driving change? And maybe Sandra, I'll go to you first.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Liz. Yes, it has been 20 years. As our friendship carries through time, as we are carried through time by our friendship is carried through time, we're also seeing a lot of progress and rolling back of so many different agendas that we more so our civil society partners are actually working on. And so it has been a very challenging several years for Indonesian civil society. But I just want to start with making sure first that we're talking about the same thing. I know we are, I'm sure we are, but I just don't want to make assumption, right? So when we talk about civil society here, what I have in mind are the kind of civil society organizations that work on issues, on agenda that are not necessarily delivering services, because I know that there are many different kinds of civil societies. We're talking about civil societies that are not necessarily providing education or providing food or providing, health services. There are time and places for those sort of work, but what I'm talking about when we are actually going forward about talking about civil society organizations are the ones that are actually working on specific agenda, for example, democratization, inclusion, women empowerment, and so on and so forth, right? And it is very important. This is a very important point to start from, because for the most part, these organizations sit in a situation in which they have to change something, right? They want to push forward something. And that something can be opposed by people in power, by people in government, and at the same time also by communities where they actually work. So when you want to push for example, inclusion, you have to work in a community that exclude people. And that community that exclude people usually are led by local leaders and communities that accept the values of excluding several people. So I think it's very important to first place them in a situation in which these are the challenges that they have every day when they push forward their agenda, when they actually work to realize their mandate. Most of the time, these organizations are mission driven, right? They have a certain agenda, they have their core agenda, and that's what they want to push. So it's very important that we understand that that's their place, right? And so then we can talk a little bit further about that. But for me, the most important one is to place them where they're at, be it vis-a-vis the policy that politicians like to make. And remember, politicians like to make policy that are accepted by the people in power in the communities. So if it's actually excluding those who are in the community want to exclude, that's actually good, particularly around election. I think people who actually work on election would know this. They would just choose the easiest one, even though that would exclude the minority. So the civil society organizations that are working particularly on these issues will find themselves in a very precarious, challenging, and can be dangerous, particularly those working in Indonesia, the ones that are most dangerous and has been the most dangerous field is environment, because you're actually dealing with corporation and not just necessarily values, which are important, but also corporation. So I think I'll stop there just to set the scene of where civil society in Indonesia and how their position is in the larger context as well as in the community.
Thanks, Sandra. I think that's a really interesting distinction, actually, that between sort of CSOs that are kind of mission driven, they're kind of pushing for change, and those that are kind of more service delivery focused. But also that really good point around the dangers that they face. And it does take me back to our time, working on in the Asia Foundation when, we were working with CSOs who were kind of all about religious tolerance and pluralism and all those kinds of things. And you'll really come sometimes at the edge, of, or the CSOs are at the edge of what is acceptable and pushing against that. And I think we can maybe come back to this when we start thinking about how do you support those organizations and what in intelligent ways. But Siale, perhaps I'll go to you and just if you can share some of your insights around, what are the roles of civil society organizations in the Pacific?
Thank you. You can hear me, Liz? Yes. Thank you, Sandra, for setting the scene. Piango is a bit different, and that's probably because of our own context. We have Pacific Islands that has populations of 20,000 or less. And so we are looking at the context of majority of our public sector is, or employment is provided by government. And so we are working in that kind of context where Piango is a regional platform of national umbrella NGOs, that within those umbrella NGOs, we have implementing civil society. And so addition to what Sandra is sharing as her experience, for us it's a little bit that we play both roles. But we are quite clear in terms of what the role of civil society in our region. We have two major roles. One is that our political voice, which is around our advocacy, making sure that that's kind of similar, I suppose, to what sharing from Sandra. But we also recognize the service delivery that we have within our civil society because of how limited the capacity of our government to reach out to our community. Some of those services are preached by civil society. And so that is has bring perhaps a bit of dynamics also to the role of civil society, because it then used by government in terms of, so some of our civil society, they receive funding from government or receive funding from donor to implement some of those outcome for specific outcome, education, health, social protections, all of that. Yeah. But what we also find is that we need to find a way, and this is probably where Piango comes in, is that some of those civil society, they have a lot of things that they learn, but they are not comfortable to speak out because it means that they will lose their funding. So how do we draw the collaborations between all of this? And this is where we find that there's a limited investment in coordinations in civil society, but we need that coordination so that the service delivery groups within our civil society can still implement projects and bring the voices of those groups to inform development. What does sustainable development looks like? And not necessarily that they have those voices to be spoken by them for the lack of, might lose their funding, but they feel comfortable and trust the advocacy groups to be the voice when they have to bring it to the public sector or the public policy spaces. And so we are now faced with that kind of coordinating our small population, but we wanted to make sure that the voices of civil society are being heard. And so a lot of that is kind of connected to house enabling environment within our government provided civil society to operate in some of those small countries, but also in terms of the spaces, civic spaces for civil society. Remembering that there's still a couple of our countries in the Pacific that is still under territories, which mean that they are operating under influence of other countries outside of the Pacific. So that's the kind of dynamics that we are dealing with as well. A lot of decolonizations conversation that is happening. That is not the most popular issue to take up when you are getting funding from the same country that you are trying to push. But really for us, what we do is that we draw the balance or trying to navigate such a dynamics environment and still survive, I suppose. Thank you.
Liz, can I just add something to that? Thank you, Siale, for that. And I also want to add that in the context of Indonesia, CSOs or civil society organization working on service delivery, they do exist. in particular, religious-based organizations. So we have religious-based organizations running hospitals, running schools, running, actually at the very lowest level of health service providers. So they do exist. They do also take funding from the government. But they also have their own source of funding, and so it's not, government is not the only source of funding for them, but yeah, they do exist as well. So it's not like all of the services actually the government is actually able to provide all of the services, and and you can imagine Indonesia being such a huge archipelago, and so civil society organizations actually do play quite important roles in providing those services.
But I think as this tension that you pointed to, Siale, around when there are organizations that are both delivering services and trying to push against around certain issues, and there are certainly, plenty of those in Indonesia as well, that, yeah, as you say, how do they navigate that tension when there is funding that they receive from government, and also trying to be critical? I think that's a really interesting point, and the role that you explained that Piango can play in that. You've touched on this a little bit already, but I wanted to kind of ask you both about some of the barriers and constraints that civil society organizations face in their work. So, in your very different contexts, what do you see as the main challenges in being able to influence change? And Sandra, perhaps I'll go to you first again.
Okay. So as I said, the barriers come from both places, right? So let's just take an issue of democracy, for example. For organizations working on issues of democracy or democratic values, because democracy is such a huge arena, right? So on democratic values like participation or inclusion, equity, and stuff like that. So when an organization working on those issues, like they see, well, first of all, they, as you said in your introduction, Liz, they are closest to the problem, right? They are, maybe they're actually also feeling the repercussions of the problem that they're trying to solve, right? Because they're actually from that community. But there are also civil society working at the national level. So, I mean, all of the, which are not necessarily immediately feeling the problems that civil society at the community level feel. So what I'm trying to say is that there's so many different levels of civil society working in different contexts. So that's, and how they work together, how the problems or solutions found in the local community are brought to civil society working at the national level, that needs collaboration, that needs trust. And as CLA talked about, that needs facilitation, right? And so there's that one line of barrier or problem that needs to be looked at. But as I said earlier, working on at the community level, and so actually at the national, at the national level, you're always faced with where is the community, where is the Indonesians that you're trying to create change on, values. Where are they? What is it that they believe in? Where is their acceptance level on certain issue, right? And we need to meet them where they're at. And you can't push for change that is so beyond the imagination of what could be accepted. And that is actually sometimes the challenge that civil society organization working on certain issue is facing, because they want to push for things, and rightfully so, but the community, the people that the citizens whom they're trying to actually create change on, they're not there, right? And so how do you understand these things? And in a place like Indonesia, you know, the usage of survey helps, right? The usage of different ways to understand where the community beliefs are on certain issues, that really helps. But that, you know, takes a lot of funding. That takes a lot of cost to actually do that. So, you know, trying even as the seemingly simple things of trying to meet the people where they are, so that they can come up with a really right programming that are accepted, but at the same time also can begin to create change. You know, that is not that simple. And so that is one of the barriers, right? And the other one is, of course, you know, the power, the government, you know, whether or not they are on the side of which part of the communities. That has to be mapped out. And um, um, if you are a government, if you're a politician, you know, it is most likely that you don't want to touch the more controversial issues. And so how do you work with, you know, politicians, government that make policies that can have repercussions to the issues that you're working on? That is also one of the most, you know, serious challenge. Yes, you can have champion in the government. We all love to use that word, the champion, the, you know, change agent within the government and all that. But the question has always been, when the rubber hits the road, right, will they stand up for you, right? Will they stand up for the kind of agenda that you're trying to push forward? So to answer your question on what is the most serious barriers, is even to understand the situation, not just from our own perspective, right? Not just from our own assumption, but really where is the position of the community on X, so that we can actually begin to design program that actually meet them where they are, and then try to create change from there on. That can be very challenging, because otherwise you just base your work on assumption. And this has happened. I'm not saying that it hasn't happened, right? And this is why sometimes, you know, you see that there's program that looks just the same again and again and again over the years, right? Because you just work on a certain assumption as opposed to work on the so-called buyer of your program, the community themselves, the one that you're actually trying to advocate change on. So those are, you know, in my mind, like, you know, is the hardest barrier for civil society organizations to work on certain issues.
That is really interesting, and it isn't actually the answer that I thought I would hear for this question, but I really get it, because you're right. Like, we do often just assume we know what people think, or, you know, as a funder, assume that civil society organizations understand their, you know, the people they want to engage with, and yet you're right, you know, those assumptions can often be wrong. And I think the other thing maybe that comes in there, especially when thinking about, you know, social norms change, like what is actually working to change people's perspectives. And yeah, you know, putting on my monitoring and evaluation nerd hat, you know, we do need to invest in that, because again, we assume that certain approaches to changing social norms work, and yet they might not be. So I think that's a really interesting point. Yeah. Siale, are you still with us over there?
Yes, I'm still here. Sorry, I have to keep on off and on the video.
That's all right. No dramas. Yeah, I wondered if you could talk about this from your perspective, some of the main challenges that you see in for civil society organizations in the Pacific in influencing change?
Thank you. I think there's a couple of things, but one of the key challenges and barriers that we had when it comes to civil society and our role is I don't think that there is a good understanding of government in terms of what's the specific role of civil society, or they pick to choose and pick whatever that they like to know or understand about the role of civil society, and oftentimes we've been accused that we are another opposition party of parliament or government because of what we stand for. But there is a lot of what we have seen, the injustices within the development discourse required healing. That oftentimes we don't take that into consideration, because when we are talking about convening and bringing people and having civil society our own space to talk about some of these things, this is a healing process. Yeah, in terms of getting people to talk about their issue, getting the community to express their concern, identify all the dynamics that they see. We see a lot of programs now are coming in and they're talking about, let's talk about what's the risk in the community, so we manage your risk, and then we see that those learning are being taken away without being institutionalized into the community, so they are part of the co-designing process of things. And so it's really about how we see our civil society being engaged in the whole system of sustainable development that is not there. And so for civil society, we still continue to fight for those spaces. And so in the absence of having formal mechanisms of engaging civil society, we will continue to be at the discretions of whoever have the resources to invest in civil society. And so we still lack the acknowledging that civil society has a certain right-based approach to engage and be part of the full cycle of sustainable development, and more so in our small countries in the Pacific, where some of those institutional arrangement is absent. Like, for example, we only have a couple less than 5 that already have National Institution of Human Rights, where we see that those institutions help. As you become an agent of change, you need that kind of environment that is enabling to support civil society in, because if you see the most evidence of barrier to our sustainable development is accountability and the lack of it. And so how do we only depend on civil society and what Sandra is talking about, the organization that their work is just to raise consent about advocating for change that is necessary to call on champions or leaders who are not, following the principles of accountability, or I'm very diplomatic here, corrupted, really, in terms of corruptions, which means that it's not really the fact of that, but the services delivery to our communities to improve on education, improve on health, are being cut off because there are certain self-interest system within our own small island states that restricted the flow of the resources for those that are mostly in need. And so the role of civil society in that perspective is critical and important, but it's also has consequences that we have seen in some part of the world, that civil society leaders have been taken to prison. Lucky enough for us, we don't get to that extent. But we also face some restrictions within our cultural context, where we can often openly state opinion in public meetings because we are women or we are young people or we don't have any status in our community. So we navigate ourselves around that. And how do we, because most of our communities, we are living in a double standard system. Our democratic system, which sometimes we refer to that as our modern system. And this is where the parliament and government and all of that. And then we also have our own traditional systems. And so when we don't have an open space to openly discuss that, we find that we struggle, and then we see leaders who are also our traditional leaders. They pick and choose which rule of the game that they can apply to themselves to get them out of some of the not so good practices that they are continuing. And it's so unfair, I must say, that it's only civil society or a group of people within our society that are given the task to speak out on some of those things. And yet we are not being invested with resources to do that, or nor have legislation to protect us if we are to say those things. So those are the when we talk about agent of change, we are capable. Civil society, we have the technical knowledge, technical understanding. We go as far as understanding the context, our traditional, our indigenous knowledge on things in terms of implementing service deliveries and all of that. But it's only when we bring those learning to get to the change or the core change that the power dynamics doesn't allow us, let alone when we are speaking and the voice that are actually representing our women or children or the minority groups, then we are seeing that we are not as much being engaged. And this is why we are calling for formal mechanisms. So we are not being given the discretions on the personality of whoever likes us or don't like us. And so that is a long way to go. And what we have seen now, donors are not investing in that kind of coordination role of civil society to bring or mobilize our solidarity. We see our civil society access to grant is in a competitive, like we have to compete with everybody else. And in that competitive process, it just undermines the solidarity that we have built over the years about civil society, because now we are fighting each other. We are stealing ideas. When we say share the data, share our experience, we're stealing ideas from those, because those are the bloodline of our civil society to write our next proposal. So we don't openly give in the environment to share, because we are not given that kind of mandate to be able to openly share, because we know resources is actually coming to us. Yes, I'm overexcited about my points, but give it to you back. Thank you.
That is
very important.
Yeah, around those kind of perverse incentives that are created, as you say. I loved the way you sort of, the competitiveness undermines the solidarity that we've built. That's such a powerful way to say it. And this idea around kind of formalizing the role of civil society, I think that's a really important point as well. And it makes me think about, how do donors perhaps strengthen the, not just individual organizations, but the kind of ecosystem for civil society. What does that look like? And strengthen that kind of solidarity and your ability to engage with each other and build strong movements. And this kind of gets to my next question for you, Sandra, which is around, you've talked about, the fact that civil society's space in Indonesia is shrinking. What are the kind of ways that civil society actors have been able to kind of continue to push within this shrinking civic space? And then are there ways that international actors can support this in ways that kind of don't get in the way and don't kind of do harm or undermine efforts?
Yeah. What you said, Ciara, really resonated, right? With our experience, not like, who am I talking for? Who am I speaking for? But like, from what I know, our civil society is also experiencing. So I want to just, speak a little bit about that. I mean, this whole thing about competing that you talked about, like the whole professionalization of CSO, which is all good, right? Because they are having to be accountable for donor funding and for, you know, and it's the donor funding from Australia, for example, is, you know, many of you are here Australians, it's your tax dollar, so they have to be accountable and so on and so forth. But then it got to a point that it becomes very mechanical, right, Sally? It really became something, you know, like you don't recognize the different nature of dealing, that this is actually a mechanism for civil society as opposed to for a for-profit. You know, that you're actually dealing with different sort of organizations that face different challenges. And so that is really, yeah, that really spoke really loudly in my head when you said that, Cialing. How do donors support the civil society organizations that are working in this increasingly shrinking space and time, right? I don't think there's any silver bullets. I don't think there's one answer to that. But if I have to choose one, that would be give them some space. Give civil society the space to actually be nimble with the changing issues, because in the situation in which you have to respond to so many different pressures created both by the communities as well as by the people in power, you know, relating to what I said about earlier, civil society have to have the space to actually respond, to actually re-strategize, to actually doing their quick political economy analysis for this changing context, right? So if the donors are so stuck into what has agreed upon earlier in their framework, that would really be detrimental to the very cause of why you're actually working with them to begin with, right? You turn civil society organization consists of activists and you turn them into bureaucrats of having to deliver what they agreed upon earlier in your own framework. Now, I know that donors are saying now, oh, you know, we're doing this iterative process. We are, you know, providing them with the ability to come to us and change and all that. But I don't think that has come out strong enough. And I think because of the many years of experience of working in a more rigid way, in a more, how do I say, not rigid, what's the word I want, in a more not flexible way, inflexible, help me, not flexible way, you know, and so even if you actually give them the space, you really need to continuously say this. And I can say this from experience myself. So this is not about, you know, my experience with DFAT and you know, as a Asia Foundation DFAT donor recipient, but like even working with civil society, Asia Foundation programming, you know, funding from donors, and work with civil society. Sometimes the civil society, even though we have already said, you know, you have that space, you have to continuously say that. And imagine if you don't say it at all. Imagine if your policy actually is about pushing forward something that you have already agreed upon. That would be really, really unproductive I would say, in doing the program that you thought that would create change. And the other thing that I want to also say on this is that donors sometimes really want to see something that is tangible, right? Policy change, or progress towards policy. So policy brief. So, you know, stuff like that, because that is very tangible. You know, there's so many different policies that are actually that have been produced in the past that was highlighted in donors report and all that, and that actually do not bear fruit in terms of creating change, right? And in pushing forward for that policy, CSOs work and put everything they got to create that, because that's what, when they wrote the proposal or when they agreed on a certain deliverables, that they said that that's something that is very important, and they didn't bought it, and that's what they work on. And I think, you know, donors also need to be what donor can do, you asked, right? So the donor can also be critical, engaging them in a critical way, not to put your knowledge above the CSO knowledge, but just be there, be a thinking buddy for the CSO with whom you work, because they also need that. So I think creating space is one thing, and creating an environment in which you can serve as a thinking body for the organizations that you support, and creating an ecosystem of thinking together among the CSO with whom you work is very important.
Thanks, Sandra. I mean, thinking buddy is normally, you know, we talk about critical friend, but I actually really like thinking buddy. I think that's going to be what I'm going to be using from now on. It's much better. But no, that's so, yeah, that's so spot on. And it kind of reminds me, I often reflect back on this, my time when I first joined the Asia Foundation 20 years ago. And I don't know whether it's just kind of like my youthful naivety or something, but I feel like, you know, we had this grant from USAID to work broadly on, you know, religious tolerance and democratic values. And I feel like we had a lot of freedom, and partly maybe because it was a grant and not a contract. And then we could then give that freedom to our civil society partners. And I feel like that those days are gone.
Well, the pendulum's starting to swing back.
Okay, good. Yeah. But I hold on to that sometimes when I think, you know, we used to be able to do this, and it is possible to kind of to give more space. Yeah. It doesn't have to be done the way we have been doing it. Siale, I want to talk to you about, you know, we've been talking about locally led development for, you know, a few years now. There's a lot of talk, but what are you actually kind of seeing in terms of shifts on the ground? You know, is there anything good happening that we can kind of use as a bit of a model, and what are the key gaps that you think there still are in terms of, yeah, taking forward this idea of locally led development?
Thank you, Liz. It's our experience in locally led has been triggered by our work on the humanitarian space. And we had done a measuring localization, because there was once upon a time we had been given at the global level that 25% of our global funding on the grant bargain has to go to local organizations. Up to now, that has not been the case, but it has triggered the interest. And what we usually have is that immediately when we see some kind of directions at the global level, everybody decided that we need to have a definition. Let's define and agree on what does that mean. And so in the Pacific, we decided, well, not necessarily that we have to come up with one definition, but we work with the Humanitarian Advisory Group, which is an NGO in Australia, in unpacking that, but do it in a way that we just come up with sets of principles so that we don't just like have one definition, but a set of principles that said, okay, if we want to see whether the donors are coming with their funding, and we see like measure whether that's locally led or is driven by something else, we have 7 principles, and these 7 principles are partnership, leadership, coordinations and complementarity, participation, policy influence and advocacy, capacity, and funding. So we kind of measure that. That's the kind of our indicators for measurement, whether we see that's real locally led interest in giving civil society the space, as Sandra was explaining. But after about 4 years, and then we went back again and look at it. And what we have seen is that there has been some progress in all the 7 areas in terms of localization and locally led, except 3 key areas out of the 7 that nothing has changed since we have started this work. One is on leadership. No change at all in leadership. Women are still not at the table. Our young people are still like the usual mentality of, the big status quo, old man power, and all that still vested in the current system that we had. Capacity, nothing's changed or no improvement whatsoever. What the interesting thing that we had found is that we have seen some capacity areas being improved, but that's because we have tailored training from outside. They come and train like on social protections and in the humanitarian space. But the capacity that is needed by this agency of change is around, are we accountable for our financial system? Are we having, policy in place to run in organizations? Where do we see our advocacy and all of that? So there's a huge displacement of needs for capacity than the current existing service training delivered, because and then you see that our local are not part of the developing of the training modules or the training that is being conducted. And so there are training that are actually more are being done, but it's the usual someone fly in and get people to sit around, and there's training, no systemic way of applying that, because the needs in terms of capacity is being displaced. And we started to see a lot more of some other things that is affecting the capacity level of our communities, like, for example, the labor mobility. It's training our people out of the country. We have been doing this work with the UNDP as part of the European Union Fund around public finance management.
Mm-hmm.
We struggle to find capacity of people to train civil society in terms of public finance. We try to do like a budget online portal, citizen budget guide. We couldn't find anyone in that. So we have capacity, but there are certain skills that are marketable, are moving out of our Pacific. And so there's a huge concern. Yeah? And then we have the last one is funding. We have funding that are available, either that if it's available to us, we cannot access it because the due diligence indicators that we need to access that is beyond our means. Yeah, and so some of the things that are even available is to, partner with government. But we all know when you partner with government, that is a negotiated space. And you need a specific skills for civil society to be able to partner with government. Otherwise, you already set yourself to fail before you even started. Yeah, and then we started to see, okay, where is the power dynamics in all of this when it's talking about funding? And the more we unpack it, the more we realize that, like, for example, in Australia, when they get funding to come to the Pacific, they give it to a contractor. Yeah. But what we are actually calling for is that put the money, help use the development corporations that we talk about. It's a global, it's a regional, and it's the national level. But in the development corporation ecosystem, it has allowed and recognized civil society as development actors. That has been approved in Busan Partnership Framework. But it seems that when we have something that is given the right to civil society to be development actors in our own right, it only stays at the region, at the international level. It is not being institutionalized back to our small nations for us to use that to demand that kind of right for civil society to participate in sustainable development. And then when we see the shifting the power we talk about, we are still not even there. Because the power is actually with where the money is, and the money is either in the, we see it now it's in the World Bank or ADB, or we call out that it needs to be in the development cooperation, because civil society has spaces within the development cooperation to demand that kind of accountability. If those funds are coming, give it to our government. We might fight our government every day, but there are spaces there. We have parliament. We voted for people in parliament. We have public services that are available for us to demand accountability. But right now, we see the funding is being channeled out of our mainstreaming, public services, that is given to more corporations and more businesses that first, their interest is not on service delivery for social services or change in terms of how we see our community accessing to those resources and services. It's given to organization and corporation that their main interest is on profit. And to make it worse, those same institutions, corporations are the ones that are coming in, and their main interest, if they want to do things on making profit, it's associated to all of our natural resources. They want to extract our logging, our forestry, they want to extract. And the sad thing is that those same corporations are being introduced to our community by our own government. The same people that we trust to make sure that we are protected are the same people that are introducing these people, because we have made proof and money to become our main focus and leave people's development centered out of our development corporations. And so if I have to say that where do we see the shift, that's exactly where the shift. We need more people's voices to demand accountability from our corporations, because there are no currently system in place for the voice of civil society. That's why we see a lot of our young people that are going to COP, because the UN system, they allow voices of young people. And so those are the things that we have seen it can be done. It is negotiated, but it can be done. And it's sad to see that we have to fly our young people from the Pacific to go and talk to the International Court of Justice, in New York or wherever, and that spaces is not available in country, just like how Sandra's explained. Thank you.
Thank you, Siale. That's, again, just such a powerful statement about, where the lines of accountability are. And I'm thinking particularly about, as you said, the, bilateral system where funding flows through managing contractors, lines of accountability, orientations are very different to, where they might be in the multilateral system and as you say, exactly as you say, there are channels for civil society voices through that. There are lots and lots of people online that I'm sure they have questions for you. So I'm going to open up the floor. However you would like to do it. If you would like to raise your hand and ask a question, you're very welcome to do that. If you're feeling a little bit shy, you can also put one in the chat and we'll ask it for you. But Sandra and Siale, as you've heard, are very open, and I'm sure they'd love to hear from you. So please. Oh, Andrew Thornley, you hop on and ask that question directly, please.
Just to prove that I'm not shy. Okay, I'm very happy to do that. Hi, Sandra and Siale, very nice to meet you through this event. Really very interesting discussion. My question in the chat box is just trying to get to the nitty-gritty, because to be very honest, in the last month or two, I've sat in a few of these conversations, and it's very interesting in highlighting the challenges, and the role of intermediaries often comes up. The issue that donors don't often directly deal with local CSOs, and so therefore we really need to look at these intermediary organizations is important. CSO needs are really crystal clear. They're often defined and well documented, but the nitty-gritty seems to be in how, as I've said in the chat, what is the avenue for engaging funders, not individually, but collectively? We talk about the forums and having a voice, but specifically, how can we engage funders? We're in a very critical time now in these changes in our sector, and it's a very important time to engage funders on more equitable grant making. But I don't see the channels, I don't see the avenue, I don't see collective action, and I don't see funders leading this process. I see individual foundations and funders making some efforts. And so I'm just curious from your perspective, taking everything that you have so eloquently outlined so far, what can be done? What can be done to get those voices heard in the right forums and to lead to action for more equitable grant making that's desperately needed? Thanks very much.
Yeah, awesome question. Sandra, do you want to respond to that?
Sure, but just to say that Andrew is not shy to have his voice heard, but very shy to have his face shown. So, Andrew, hello. There you are. So, I don't have the answer, Andrew, but I think let me try from this. Like in the old days, I hate saying that, there used to be a donor in many countries, and Indonesia included. There used to be like donor coordination, thingy, right? And they not the intermediaries like the Asia Foundation or other in between organizations, but like the big guys, right? Or girls, and they sat on the table. They do donor coordination. Even with that, right? Even with that, we know that they sat on the table and then they left, and then they would do things in their own merry way and in the ways that they thought make sense to their constituency, i.e., US would be Washington, D.C., Australia would be Canberra. Those are the constituents, to whom they are accountable. And so I think maybe in this to answer, like, I think I'm pessimistic that there would be one agreement among the one agreement among funders to actually how creating, as you said, a more equitable and appropriate grant making to local CSOs. I really do not see how that would happen in the next couple of years, because we know that they work on their own. It's not that they work on silos. Even when you're talking about the ways in which they engage CSOs, right? Even working on certain issues, elections, for example, that you have worked on for so many years, right? We would sit on the table with different donors doing different things. And I don't think there's like really, in my experience, really specific, really an experience that we all agreed on specific actionable item that really showed that coordination actually work. Or give an impact. And so I guess what I'm saying is that I wouldn't put my energy on trying to create that, because history shows that just wasn't that's just not a fruitful effort. It's not that I disagree with trying to do that, with the importance of that, but politically, I just don't see that could actually happen.
If I could have given something like like a dream that can happen if I think of it long enough. I would actually ask the donors and the funders to bring back core funding to civil society.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Full stop. Because there's a lot of expectation from civil society, and I've been meeting a lot of people coming to the Pacific, and they said, Sally, what is your long vision for civil society, for your region, or for your? I said, I can't look beyond 6 months, because my head is down here looking down all visions, because I don't have any confirmation that I'll pay my staff or pay my electricity or pay my, we underestimate sometimes the opportunity for us to dream and look, foresight for the future, when you are confirming that you will have a long-term commitment to your team. And I think that sometimes the donors now are kind of just like thinking that they'll come and flow their money around just for project without giving any salary to the team that is doing the hard work, the soft negotiation that you deal with when you sit at the table with your government, and then you have a system where the donor dialogue with the government when they come to your countries, they don't allow civil society there. So those are spaces that is still close to civil society that we can't even negotiate or say. That's one end. The other side is that we at Piango, we are experimenting some of the different funding modality that we could say to the donors, we have tested this one out and it works. And one of that is what we call the rota system, where, and this is to my earlier point when I was saying we undermine our solidarity when we are competing. So we ask donors to give the funding to Piango as a direct support. And then we'll figure out how we can still bring, because one of the critical questions that is asked by donors is the due diligence. That we often don't meet the criteria of the due diligence of some of the donors. But there are some critical principles of the due diligence that is important that we still want to keep. And that is, how do we accountable for the money, making sure that we have system in place. That is very important. But there are certain things in terms of, we need to, before you come to the Pacific or come to Piango and talk about it, you have to show that you are already believe and trust that this money is going to make something happen, and you trust us that we can try. We may fail, of course, but at least that trust is already a starting point. Because if you are just coming in with the money to see that you are, whatever it is, without you fully accepting, because when you trust the system, you will have the compassion within the system to help us learn how we do. And remember, we are talking about an ecosystem that we never had this kind of, and our Pacific, we come from a culture of very subsistence. We go fishing today, eat all of it, and then we go fishing tomorrow, and then, long term in terms of work plan and log frame, all of that, we struggle. We struggle because it means long-term vision, long-term planning. That does not guarantee that my team will be paid until the next project, because the biggest or the longest term project that we had is at least 3, 4 years, 5 years if we are lucky. Yeah. So how do you kind of operate in a way for as agent of change when we are just talking about short term? Right now, what we do is that we have small resources within our Piango that kind of anticipatory actions in nature. If there's an organization that needs just a support to at least get their audit done so that they are passing to the next phase of a proposal that they are writing, we give them that little bit of funding. But that it would mean that we will at Piango need to have funding that does not attach to a project. It's our own money, so we can then help, build the capacity of our civil society, just so that they are grant ready. But it's not easy. One of the things that we see is that if we have donors that believe in our work, they also need to start helping us to make our own money. That entrepreneurship kind of thinking. If you believe in us, give us some research work or collecting data that we can actually do, and you give that money to us, that we are free to do whatever that we decide to do with that, so that we continue to make sure that our civil society can access the resources. Because we talk about due diligence in a way that oftentimes is not within the culture of how we operate in our small system. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Siale. We have some other questions. Rebecca, hi.
Hello, everyone. Hi. Lovely to be part of this conversation. Thanks, Siale and Sandra and Liz. My question builds on what Siale, you were saying about belief and trust, and Sandra, what you were saying earlier about like that collective architecture of civil society organizations. I'm just wondering, from a position of being part of being a small NGO, I'm wondering what are the steps that smaller NGOs might be able to take in terms of fostering mutual accountability when we can't offer funding or influence or any political leverage with donors? Is it something about profile or partnership, shared learning? That's my question about collective strength.
Siale?
Thank you, Rebecca. I'll just give one example. We have a donor that is, I think they're based in Colorado. They are the Global Green Grant. They can only give 5,000 USD to a community that anything that is green, And then in Fiji, we have a big populations of informal settlement. And in the informal settlement, that means that most of the public utilities like electricity, water are not connected because the land does not belong to those that are residing there. But they allow these projects to be used by community-based organizations in the informal settlement to do water tanks and stuff like that. Yeah, and so because we don't expect that they will have their own accounting or financial system, they're using Piango as fiscal, as we call it, fiscal agency for these funds to be coming through. And so all we do is that we support them. If it's a water tank, we just support them in terms of supplying, and we give the resources to them to build the water tank basin. And the interesting thing that we had found is that there are capacity within these communities. We had at one point done one, and you know how we put into the proposal, we have a water management training. And then we turn up to the community, they will have to send their kids to a little spring down from where they are to fetch the water, and that water is being managed to run the household needs of the family. I have never felt so embarrassed in my life when I was standing up there to do water management training for this community, which that's what they do every day, is managing that little water that they fetch from the spring too. And then we set up these 10,000 water tanks. What it does is bring the community together for the first time. It was a little project led by the women, but we often don't see how some of those small projects allow community to come together. They managed to agree on a little governance system that they will have to manage the project. And then in Fiji, every time that there's a water shortage in the community, they send a water truck. But the water truck has to demand that you have enough bucket or enough container for them to have like one run. So you still see that we are dealing with a system that water becomes a commodity. It's not a right for everybody. But because we have established this big tank in the community, it was not any problem for the water truck to come because they know that every time they go, it's worth the fuel and everything else. So we are looking at system that some of those things that are basic human rights for our communities are being commoditized. The truck doesn't have to go to the community even though they don't have any water, because it's associated with how much money that you have to fill the truck. And so we are looking at some of these things, and sometimes we undermine the intelligence of our people just because we don't give them that opportunity. And that's the trusting kind of thing that I'm talking about. We trust that our people, they know how to do things, give it to them, share the risk. Otherwise, they will be sitting around holding to the money and then because we kind of afraid that someone will run away with the money. We have done this work for 5 years. We have not had anyone run away with the money.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Siale and Rebecca, for your question. Some other questions? Ron, yeah, thanks, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for your insights. I think my question, and we've sort of talked a little bit about it, we've talked a little bit about locally led development, but often that's the donor's agenda. So it's Australia's agenda to localise, and so the power still kind of is held. What do you see, and this may be kind of the thinking more than the 6 months, Siale, that you're talking about, but what do you see as principles or pathways or practicalities to decolonising our approach and decolonising partnerships?
I'll give it a try and give Sandra the response. When we have developed what we call the FALE, which is a facility aiding locally led engagement, which is a funding mechanism that we tried to see if we could develop it like a trust funds. And that this trust funds is available to support humanitarian response from our community, because every time that there's a disaster in our small island states, it often takes the government about 3 days to deal with the diplomacy. They talk about Australia, New Zealand coming with a big plane and everything, and our people are left without any direction whatsoever. So this small kind of a platform was to kind of figure out how we can be able to have resources that we can give it, like if there's weather report that's saying that it's coming, there's a flooding here and there, is it something that is enough that we can give it to community to pay for vehicles to transport people from low-lying areas to a safe space in a way that is done before the cyclone hit? Because right now the cyclone hit and then we start running around, and it's dangerous. How does that work? And then we start to see that these are some of the learnings that has been expressed to the Australian system. Either it's going through the very different programs that they have in countries, but what we have seen is that it's interesting, if I can say, that every time that there is, I find it a little bit confusing, and I can say this bluntly I know a lot of Australians are here, that every time that there is a program that Australia wanted to put out, they call for submissions or they call for an academic review of something. And because this is not very much a kind of a process that we in the Pacific and civil society find that we contribute to, we often find that is this, it's disconnected. And then now we are starting to see the priorities of Australia being shifted. You're now talking about infrastructure. You're talking about connectivity. It's getting to be more technical in a way, and it's like, given to contractors. That we often find that we are out of the scope of that. So the only thing we are now looking at, okay, how do we engage in this? Maybe we look into the procurement of our government in terms of processes or policies, but then it's very distracted. And then we started to see the funding coming to civil society is really very much on thematic grouping, like gender, disability, or climate change. And then in the reality of what Piango is doing is that it's starting to get like gender issue. I have no problem with feminist group and all the groups that are actually fighting for the right of women. But when we talk about development, sustainable development, every issue we have is a women's issue. We talk about education is a women's issue. We talk about health is a women's issue. And then we are starting to see that we are silo out some of the thematic issues to become like only for women to take, or issues that is only for young people to take. It's not fair, because we need to really mainstream, and some of the organizations like Piango, which we are like all about sustainable development and all about like when we report on our voluntary reporting to the UN, or when we report on some of the things that we do, it has to be across the board, where it does not matter whether you're a woman or. And then we started to see the temporary special measures on 10%, 20%. Hello, the percentage of our population is 50. Why are we going under that kind of leverage just to prove a point? We just have to make sure that we keep on fighting, that it's not just like for a certain group, but for everybody. Yeah, and so that's the kind of thing that I really want to see, that when we talk about Australia and your support, do it in a way that is more inclusive, not thematic on its own, but look at the invest in coordination, because we need to coordinate our civil society, because we come from a very diverse sector. Sorry, Sandra, I'm taking your time. Over to you.
Not at all, not at all. So I think maybe it's the timing of where Indonesia is right now, right? We have rolled back whatever we have already achieved in the last 30 years after the fall of Suharto so much, right? So the whole framework from which I'm actually looking at the world now is more pessimistic, and also perhaps more realistic. And I say this because I think this spoke, this may also help. This is how my mind work when Rebecca, you asked your question, right? And Braun also, I'm in a place in which I think we should just stay away, and Andrew's question as well, right? We should stay away from trying to change the big players and create a system in which all the big players can agree on something, or because I just don't, I have not seen that. I know that's important, but politically, I just don't see there's any appetite or even room for that. There is a lot of talk about decolonizing development, about pushing for locally led this and that, right? But how many years have this been talked about, and how much change? And if you think about the many conferences, the many papers, the many everything, strategies, right, that have been developed, and we have not really seen a lot of change on that. Yes, it's important to use it to remind ourselves that that's our goal. But I truly believe that if I were to do it, I would do it just one donor at a time. And in fact, one program at a time. Like Australia has many different programs in Indonesia, right? So whatever program I'm working on, I would be really working on with the people who are responsible for that program, to actually be able to see it my way. Let's make it work for you as a administrator of this particular grant in your office, and us who are needing to make this and this and this and that action. I truly believe that one-on-one is all we have space on right now. And with like Siale said, right? I mean, so many things we have to deal with, changing the big landscape of the donor. should not be the responsibility of the organizations working on the ground. Not to say that they should not be doing it, but I'm just saying that we cannot put that responsibilities, or I would say they should not be taking up that responsibility to actually, hello, locally led, and like from wherever next to the river that they're screaming on, because I just don't see that that's actually moving the needle. But on the other hand, I also see, right, that the pendulum sometimes, and this is my what I have seen as well, the pendulum sometimes goes to the other way, in which, the idea of locally led, meaning that just completely hands off and not really working with them. And that also can create issues. But that's another issue altogether. But I think the most important thing is that if you're asking me, what would you do if you run a program, or if you work with if you are a CSO working with a particular donor, I wouldn't put my energy on trying to change the largest donor ecosystem, because people are doing that and have been doing that, and I have yet to see how that actually hit the ground. I would, but this is not to say that there's no space. So to actually negotiate for ourselves and our other fellow CSO organizations that are working with particular project, with a particular person, right? We have to also remember there is a person that is actually running that and administering that in the donor's office, and working with that person, helping them understanding exactly what you're trying to do, and helping them being able to articulate to whoever she or he is reporting to me, that is almost that is almost the most important thing you can do, because you have then a person, a collaborator, if you like, within the organization that really needs to support you, and being able to work together on that. I think what I would say is the most crucial thing to do for your organization, not when we're all and gone from this world and the next generation of CSO comes, right? Yeah, but we only have 24 hours in a day, and we need to sleep sometimes. So I would choose my battle, and I would choose what I can actually influence and make changes on in terms of the relationship with the donor.
I think that's a good point. As you said, it's pessimistic, but perhaps realistic. But yeah, it gets to that kind of like, what can we do as individuals, and what is your individual sphere of influence? You may not be able to change the big picture, but yeah, what is it something that you can do as an individual? I feel like we could talk about this for like hours and hours, but I know we've all got to get on with our day. Thank you so much, Sandra and Siala. You've both been really generous with your time and with your insights and experiences, and really appreciate you taking this time out to come and talk to us about this issue. Thank you to all of you who've joined and who've shared your comments and your questions. It's been really, really lovely to see such good engagement from across the sector. We will be uploading a recording of this to our RDI YouTube channel. We're also going to be preparing a summary paper, which will be on our website in the coming weeks. Be lovely to get your feedback on this. That kind of just helps us really understand, what things are going well, what we can do to improve it, and importantly, what sort of topics and things you are interested in hearing about through these sessions. It only takes a couple of minutes. There's a QR code on the screen, and Jane has posted the link in the chat as well. You should also receive a follow-up email. So thank you very, very much to all of you, Sandra, Siale, and also I just want to give a big shout out to Jane Kennedy, who is our RDI Network Coordinator, She is doing amazing, amazing work, including for this event, but also just broadly in herding all us cats and keeping us organized and posting on our LinkedIn. So please do join our LinkedIn. Thank you so much, everyone, and we hope to see you at the next Exchange Insights event. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye,
you very
everyone.
much.